My Wendigo encounter. This story takes place in the backcountry of the area I grew up in. Be warned, some of this may be frightening for some. To start it off, my name is James and I am now 28 years old and living in Texas. Anyways, here's my story. So back in 2019, I remember there being a big uproar of unknown creatures roaming the forest, like Bigfoot and skinwalkers. But this story isn't about them. This story is about probably one of the scariest things I've ever heard about. The Wendigo. A few months after one of my friends, Jacob, mentioned this big uproar, I went to go see him. Since I had been away, enlisted in the United States Marines. I got back after being discharged, and one of the first things I did was to go and see him. We were having a good old time, and he brought up the idea of going out to a little hangout spot his now ex-girlfriend took him to when they wanted to get away for a few hours. So I decided why not. I grabbed my gun and we went out to this extremely secluded area and started messing around on the old dock that was there. It had been pretty much forgotten by the looks of it, poorly maintained, and some of the boards were almost completely rotted through. So about 30 minutes into our shenanigans, Jacob brought up the topic of the Wendigo. The name sounded a little scary, even for me. Curious, I asked him about it. He said if you went into the woods and said Wendigo 3 times, you would come across the scariest looking thing you had ever seen. Me, calling his bluff, told him to prove it. To this day, I wish I hadn't. We started walking on this little path that led deep into the thick woods, close to the Alabama state line. We walked for maybe 20-ish minutes and decided we were in a good spot. I feel like it's worth knowing that it had been raining a lot over the past couple of days, so the ground was completely saturated with water. I turned to Jacob and he dared me to do it. I stood there, in complete silence. The rest of the forest was almost silent as well, besides the tall pines swaying in the wind high above our heads. Reluctantly, I started to say it. Wendigo, Wendigo, Wendigo. Then, nothing happened. I let out a sigh of relief at the fact that nothing had happened. One of the things about mine and Jacob's friendship is that we love to prove another wrong. In our friendship of 10 years, I think it was the first time I'd ever proven him wrong at anything. We started to talk a little bit of shit back and forth at each other when we heard a noise in the distance. Me, still having the reflexes I had from the Marines, immediately snapped towards the direction of the noise that were soon turning into noises. I started to move closer to the noises, and then shortly after, we saw a few coyotes running across the path about 30 feet in front of us. I breathed another sigh of relief, but that relief did not last long. I knew something was up, I just didn't know what was. All I knew was it was time for me and Jacob to leave. As we turned to leave the woods, all of a sudden, a tall pine tree started to groan and creak as it started to come down. Noticing this, and in a moment of pure instinct, I shoved Jacob forwards as the tree came falling through the rest of the branches and landed right between us. Jacob let out a cry of terror as the tree landed, and I hopped over the tree to get to him. I could feel his heart pounding like a drum as I grabbed him by his shirt and yanked him to his feet. He was still terrified and practically crying as I screamed at the top of my lungs, "Move, Jacob! Fucking move now!" I spun him around really hard, causing him to fall to his knees. I got him up and we both started to sprint down the path and toward the direction we came. I didn't dare look back, and neither did Jacob. I was sprinting through the woods when a familiar sound came from behind me. "Jacob! Jacob, come quick!" It was the sound of Jacob's younger sister, Olivia. He turned and tried to get past me, the whole time screaming, "Olivia!" I stopped him and said, "Jacob, look at me. It's not her. Do you hear me? It's not her." Just then, another pine tree started to buckle. I saw it just in time to tackle Jacob down to the ground, and both of us were nearly crushed. I screamed at Jacob once more, "Go! Get out of here! Go now!" As I was screaming, I pulled my gun out of my waistband and aimed it down the trail in the direction of where we came. Jacob made it to the opening of the trail and turned back and noticed I was still aiming my gun down the trail. "Bradley, get out of there! Come on, hurry!" I turned and started sprinting towards him. As I made it into the clearing a good 50 feet, I turned, and that's when me and Jacob both saw it. The thing we had ushered into showing itself. The Wendigo. It stood about 9 feet tall on its hind legs. There was practically no meat on its bone. It had really skinny legs and even skinnier arms. Its skin a pale white, almost like a vampire's, but the thing I noticed most about it were its eyes, a vibrant blue, almost like a lightsaber. Having had enough fear, I raised my gun and fired it at the Wendigo. Jacob, not sticking around to see if I had killed it, turned and ran towards the car. I turned and did the same as he passed me by. That was my first experience with this so-called wendigo, and I pray almost every night that I never have to encounter something that terrifying again. I'm a filmmaker by profession. For this one project, a horror short film, I, along with fellow team members, were at this location in Diwali. This location was, however, provided to us by our producer, which I liked. I loved it, in fact. It was the closest to what I had in mind for my film. Outside, it had a lot of open area covered in bushes. It was just alongside the main road. From the gate, we would walk 150 meters through the bushes to reach the house. The bungalow had an eerie vibe. The whole house was empty. All we could hear was the crickets chirping. It was around 9 p.m. in the winter last year. All of us had gathered around to get the remaining work done. I was mostly supervising. Amit was doing the storyboards. Shamim was sketching the designs accordingly. Rahul was sitting by the wall, busy on his phone. Rahul and I don't believe in any supernatural power. In fact, he was watching some ghost videos on YouTube. We were all sitting in a big hall with the main door open. We could easily see the road through the door. There was no electricity. All the production equipments were provided to us in advance, as we were about to shoot in the next 3 days. We had batteries and production lights. However, we were only using one of the lights. We were waiting for Anurag, a teenager friend of Shamim, who wanted to assist us in the project. He was supposed to be there in half an hour, and we were chilling and working. The mood was light and creative. We also had a bottle of old rum, a few packets of cigarettes, so a light booze was along the way. Not for me, though. I didn't feel like it. So around 9:15, Anurag arrived and rushed inside, creeped out. He shook hands with all of us, kind of in awe. We offered him a fruity. Later, he sat with Amit and helped him with the sketching. He curiously said to me, "Can I also read the script?" I smiled and handed over a copy of the script to him. Why not? For the next 15 minutes, he went through it thoroughly and kept looking up and smiling. He joined Amit again. A few minutes later, he reluctantly asked, "Why did you choose this place to shoot? Couldn't you find any other place?" "Why?" I responded. "Are you scared of this place?" He looked so from the beginning. He told us that he had told his parents that he was going to one of his friends. They wouldn't have allowed him to come over to this place. We asked the reason, and he pointed towards the side of the main gate and told us that 3 kids had died here because of some accidental fire during the British rule. This house belonged to some high-ranked British officer. The kids were his children. Many people hear their voices every now and again. They hear kids cry in pain. Many passers have also claimed to see a girl child about 8 to 10 years old standing on the gate, crying for help. Yes, she is white, dressed in a green frock. This shook the hell out of Shamin and Amit. Rula and I were still skeptical, but Amit was panicking the most. He demanded that we leave now and look for another location, and Shamin joined him. Anurag looked at all the activities silently. All of us were from Mumbai. We had to look for a hotel if I left, so, with immense persuasion, we convinced them to stay for the night. We decided to keep working, and now with the music on. If anything were to happen, it would have happened by now. Rahul and I assured them that nothing is going to happen, and that we will leave in the morning, unharmed and cheerful. For the next few hours, Rahul had managed to get the mood lighter with his witty jokes. No one looked out the door. At 1:30, we decided to prepare our beds and take rest. We left the LED panel light on, opened our beddings, and laid down. We talked for a few minutes more, and then everyone fell asleep, one by one. I decided to stay awake a little longer to chat with my girlfriend. We were all facing the door, which we had left a little bit open due to the odor this place had. By now, all I could hear was the snores and crickets chirping. I was engrossed in chatting, so much so that I didn't pay attention to the chirps that had gone silent. It was a sudden click. Everything was now silent and calm, but I continued chatting as it was more interesting. Then, from the corner of my eyes, I saw a figure standing and peeping through the door at me. I looked at it, and it was inside. A girl about 8 to 10 in a green frock, whose face was not visible due to the insufficient light. But it looked at me. I was stunned. I moved my head in slow motion and looked at the phone. I gathered all the courage I had to look up at it again. She was closer, right across my feet. My eyes welled up out of fear, but that wasn't it. I saw 2 more figures peeping at me through the open door. I again slowly looked at my phone and typed, "I'm dead today." The text didn't go through as the network was out. There was already network issues in this place. I could sense that the other figures had also entered the room, so I decided to turn away. I did, very slowly, locked my phone and closed my eyes. But suddenly, I felt that my blanket was being pulled down slowly. In an intact position, I grabbed it and pulled it back up, while breathing deeply, my eyes pouring. I didn't realize when I fell asleep. The next morning, I called my producer and told him that this place was inappropriate and that the team is not comfortable shooting here. He was furious, but soon agreed. We loaded the equipment and rented an SUV and drove off. As we drove out and got on the road, I looked back at the house. 3 children, standing in the corridor, stared at me with disappointment. I guess only I could see them, because Amit too was looking in the same direction and did not react. I never spoke about the experience to anyone. I saw them, but I was unharmed. I somewhat felt guilty about not being able to talk to those kids. I never knew that I could be scared too. I quit the project and swore to not work on another horror project ever again. I've been experiencing unexplainable phenomena ever since I can remember. I want to engage with opinions from different backgrounds about my experiences. I'll skip to the experience itself. I'm about 10 at the time of experiencing this. I grew up with grandparents in rural Mymensingh. Theirs was a tin shed house about 100 meters away from a vehicle-worthy road. The earthen path that connected my grandparents' house to that road wound around a deep pond and went through a bamboo bush. In November of 2011, we were visiting my grandparents. My father had taken me to the bazaar in the evening to buy some groceries, and then sent me back with them and told me to come back with some money because he wanted to gamble with his old friends. While going back to the house with groceries, I heard a sound in the water as I passed by the pond. It was a splash, but a quiet and oddly drawn-out one. I stopped to see what was making that noise. There was a half moon in the sky, but the shadows of the bamboo bush fell onto the pond, obscuring my view. The water rippled and lapped. Whatever had entered the water seemed to move quietly. After straining my eyes for a bit, but able to discern nothing, I concluded that it was some kind of animal and moved on. The wind picked up while I was at my grandparents' house, and when I was going back to my father with the gambling money, the bamboo bushes were too loud for me to hear anything of what was going on at the pond. I stayed with my father and his friends for about an hour before starting my way towards my grandparents' house again. The moon had lowered in the sky now, the shadows had lengthened, and I had to focus fully on the path before me as I walked. So I had not looked up at the pond until I heard someone stepping on water. I looked towards the source of the sound, and there she was. A woman sat cross-legged above the water, her skin white, pearl white I think, and seemed to exude a pale white glow, somehow like moonlight, but there was no way the moonlight reached her at where she sat on the pond. Her hair, somehow darker than the shadows in the background, flowed weightlessly in the air. Her whole being seemed to be floating weightlessly above the water, bobbing up and down slightly. I thought her eyes were closed, but when I looked at them, I realized they were just the same white as her skin, and they were trained on me. So I ran. There wasn't anything in my hand, and by some miracle, I didn't stumble and fall even once. I ran all the way to my grandparents' house, crying and stuff. They asked me what happened, and after some deliberation, I told them I saw a snake. As a 10-year-old, I was a bit too embarrassed to say I saw a nude female ghost. I was laughed at for being scared of snakes anyway. Maybe I should have just told them what I saw. My father came back around midnight, and he seemed to not see anything. My grandpa died in 2020, and afterwards my grandma decided to drain the pond and fill it up. They found an old lock with someone's hair tied to it at the spot that I saw her. Maybe that's related. Anyway, that's my experience. What do you think of it? Have you experienced or heard of something similar? I'm excited to see how you interpret what happened. Hey everyone. I kinda stepped away from the paranormal for a while when my dad's cancer came back. That's the reason I'm writing this, to share the experiences I've had during and after the dying process. For anyone that's been next to a loved one that was dying, they may agree that many strange occurrences happen. In February of 2021, my dad went in to have his vocal cords removed due to cancer. The operation was successful. Things were tough due to communication issues, but he was alive and seemed to be healthier than ever. That is all that matters. Unfortunately, that following November when he went to get his second follow-up on biopsy, they found that his cancer had spread to his right kidney and in the course of 3 months had progressed to stage 4. On the night of June 17, 2022, my mom texted me that my dad had said he was going. I rushed over. He held on for 7 more days. During those days, the atmosphere felt so heavy. Even while alone, it always felt like you were in a crowded room. You'd hear someone pacing the hallway when everyone at the house was in my father's room. You'd hear faint conversations when no one was talking. Doors would be open after you know you had just closed them. One night, we were all with my dad sharing memories and joking around to keep the mood as light as you can in such a situation. The basic stuff. I was leaning against my mom's dresser when I felt something hit me lightly on the side of my bicep. I looked around me to find what it was, but there was nothing. So I asked if someone threw something at me. No one said they did. The best way to describe what it felt like was if someone took a balled up piece of paper and played with it until it was very soft and tossed it at you. After discussing it, we all seemed to realize at the same time that my grandmother used to playfully punch me in that same spot. It gave me both chills and joy at the thought of her saying hey. Another encounter happened to my younger sister. She was in her room when she suddenly smelled burning sage and then sweet grass. Then she heard a man say something. She immediately recognized the voice belonging to my dad's friend that was passed suddenly many years ago. Throughout that week, many of us on different occasions saw a shadow figure that would peek its head around the threshold of my dad's bedroom door. It didn't have the shape of anyone any of us recognized, so no one could really agree on who it was or what it was. A friend of my sister believed it was something malevolent, but I didn't and still do not think so. During this time, we were able to communicate with Dad through yes and no questions. We'd ask if a person that we knew who had passed was there, and he would nod or shake his head accordingly. We gathered through this that both my grandparents and 3 family friends that had passed were there, but also someone he didn't know, but said wasn't a threat. That's why I believe this figure was a guide from the other side. On June 24th, 2022, at 10:45 a.m., my dad took his final breath. He was 70 years old. The moment he left, all the heaviness that had been there all week seemed to also leave, but the experience stayed and took on a new feeling. About an hour and a half after he had passed, I was outside with my sister, our cousin, and my sister's friend when we heard a car door shut. This particular door shutting can't be mistaken. It was the driver's side door of my dad's 1968 Chevy C10 pickup truck. It had belonged to my grandfather before he had passed. My dad loved this truck. It had been sitting, not running, for a long time. Just days before my dad died, my nephew decided to get it running again and gave it a wash. We think that my dad was taking one last look. A few nights after, another of our friends was walking to the kitchen when he suddenly heard a voice say his name behind him. He's not really a believer, but he insists the voice he heard was Dad's. On another night, I was sitting on the back steps as he was standing in front of me talking when he jumps and says that he just glanced at the screen door and saw my dad's silhouette standing there. Fast forward a couple of months, things had got bad financially and I had to move back into my parents' house. My mom doesn't sleep in the bedroom anymore, so I moved into it. Same room, bed that my dad passed in. On occasion, when I'm trying to get to sleep, I feel someone lay next to me, in the same spot that my dad had laid. Sometimes I feel someone grab my big toe and yank it, something my dad used to always do. One day, I went to pick up my phone, and as I pulled it towards me, it felt like someone tried to pull it out of my hand. It didn't feel aggressive, and in that instant, I had a mental image of my dad grinning. It took me a few months to finally feel something after his passing. After he had passed, I didn't feel. I was numb. I didn't cry or anything. Then, one day, it hit me in full force. But it wasn't sadness that overcame me. It was anger. It was hatred. I'm not a hateful person, but in that moment, I hated all the doctors and nurses that had worked with my dad. I hated their lies, that he would be alright. I hated them for not stopping the cancer like they had promised. I hated God for allowing this. And as bad as it sounds, I hated my dad simply because he had died. I wanted so badly to punch him square in the jaw, to cuss him out for not stop smoking when we had told him for 18 years. I remember looking at a picture of him and just yelling, "Fuck you, you stupid sob, fuck you," just yelling "F you" over and over until finally the tears came and I cried myself to sleep. It was around 3 a.m. when I woke up to someone walking around my room. I hear the steps walk to one side and what sounded like someone going through things. Then the steps would walk to the other side of the room and again, things being gone through. I had a fish tank that I kept the light on at night, so I could see I was alone. So I sit up and mutter, "What the hell?" Then, as clearly as day, I heard my dad's voice say, "It's me, bud. It's okay to be angry," followed by something I couldn't make out. A few nights ago, it cooled down outside to 68 degrees, so I decided to go out and walk around the property. I didn't know why, but I grabbed my spirit talker, those little boxes that displays a word and a computer's voice says the word. As I walked, I turned it on, and a short while later, it started talking. The box said my dad's name, and I said, "What about his name?" The box said, "Honest." What's he honest about? Trees. My dad was a Native American. He was a storyteller, and one of his main talking points was about Mother Earth and how the trees play an important role in life and how we should respect them and honor nature. Where is Dad's name? Come and go. Why did he come and go? To be happy. Being a skeptical believer, I take those boxes with a grain of salt, but I couldn't help but get a tad emotional. I'm going to tell you about my guardian angels. I first heard them when I was 17. I always felt followed, yet never in danger. The first time I heard one speak was while I was walking to work. I just got this job at Burger King in Charleston. I was walking on the sidewalk, all excited because I worked hard to get this job and the money was going to help me and my sister and her kids. Well, as I was walking along the Highway 78, I was not paying attention to the traffic when I heard a voice tell me, "Move over." So I did, but maybe not far enough because I heard her scream, "Move over now!" As I moved further into the grass, a white car flew by me, hitting my left arm below the elbow with its mirror. If I had not moved when I had, the poor lady would have hit me, causing me to go headfirst into a cement wall. I did not have any broken bones or skin, but I did have a really bad bruise. The funny thing about this fact was I needed like $1,500 to get caught up on the bills. The lady's insurance guy showed up a week later with a check for $2,000. I did not keep that job after the accident because I was late that day. My second encounter with my guardian angel happened to me in Fort Walton Beach, Florida. I have really bad diabetes and did not have a doctor or medical coverage to get the drugs I needed to take care of myself. Well, I had gotten my son on the bus for school. At home, it was me and my daughter that was 4 years old at the time. I went and looked in on her as she was still asleep and laid down on my couch taking a nap when I heard a man yell, "Wake up!" After hearing a voice tell me to do something the first time, I learned to listen. I woke up when my daughter was staring at me, scared to death. I then rolled over and started to get up to see smoke coming from her bedroom. When I noticed the smoke, I ran for the phone thinking I should call 911, but as I got to the phone, his voice came through yelling, "Get out now!" I grabbed my daughter and ran outside. When I looked back, the house was fully engulfed in flames. I lost everything, my baby pictures and clothes. I had nothing left to save my daughter and my son, and yes, me as well. I can say if you ever hear a voice telling you to do something, I suggest you listen because I did, and it is why I am alive today. I'm going to go ahead and say that I have never actually seen a spirit, aside from orbs in photographs and on videos. This story is just a series of random events that my mother and I have experienced in her apartment. At one point, I was playing with an Ouija board in my room. I freaked out when the planchette moved by itself and just stopped playing. I was too freaked out to say goodbye, so my pagan friend told me that I may have opened a gate or whatever, and that may explain this stuff. These things all happened shortly after my father died too, so that is a possible theory as well. Another is that someone told me the apartment that my mom lives in were built on what used to be a prison. No matter why these things happened, they did. I don't remember this part as I was just a child, but my mother has told me countless of times that when I was a toddler, just able to walk, she heard me babbling to someone in my baby talk, as she calls it, in the living room. She came out of the kitchen to find that I had somehow managed to open the front entrance door and that I was sitting on the front floor of the doorway, looking up at someone and talking to them, giggling and smiling. When she looked out to see who I was talking to, no one was there. Unnerved by it, she closed and locked the door. If anything else happened after that, I don't remember anything aside from things disappearing and reappearing, but that could have just been forgetfulness. Everything else happened more recently, mostly within the last 3 or 4 years. Now, I like to listen to something at night while I sleep. It makes it easier for me to relax. At my mom's apartment, I had my own personal stereo, which I listened to on my iPad throughout the night. Perhaps my stereo was just possessed, but I remember waking up one night to find that the volume on my stereo was muting and unmuting by itself. The remote was on my nightstand, so there was no way I could have rolled over on it. Plus, when it muted and I tried to unmute it on the remote, it did not work. Another time, around 6 a.m., I was laying awake in my bed, trying to fall back asleep, and just as I was dozing off, the volume on my stereo began to steadily turn up louder and louder by itself until it got so loud I had to turn it off because it was hurting my ears. Once again, the remote was on my nightstand. Another night, around 5 a.m., I was laying awake in bed, just dozing off again, and I suddenly heard a loud sound like something falling. There had been no vibration or anything, so I got up to investigate and found a little square mirror that I used for doing my eyeliner and stuff was laying face up on the floor. I remember because I've never liked looking at my reflection in the dark. It just creeps me out. Since I moved out, my mom has told me stories of picture frames falling in the dead of night as well. I can also recall one time one of my musical toys went off by itself when I was younger. That's pretty much all I remember that's happened to me, but my mother has told me her own stories as well. She told me that one night, while I was out with my boyfriend at the time, she was trying to sleep and she heard a sound like someone opening and closing the refrigerator. Once, she swore she heard me calling for her from my room, but I hadn't called her. Another night, also around 5 a.m., she woke to a very frightening feeling of someone standing next to her bed and staring down at her. She said a prayer to God and forced herself to go back to sleep. When she woke up again later, all was fine. She also had told me many times about seeing shadows coming out of my room during the nighttime bathroom trips, but I had never experienced that, which is probably best. My mother has always been sensitive to the paranormal since childhood. I may post some of her personal stories in the future. I've since moved out of my mother's apartment, but I still go back to spend the night on occasion. I haven't experienced anything during my visits, but sometimes she tells me things that she experiences while I'm away. Nothing major, and neither of us have been harmed, just scared, so I guess everything is okay. I wrote about a year ago about a visit from my father that completely blew my mind. Since then, my house has been a chaotic mess. My two older children, whose bedrooms were upstairs, have now moved downstairs to share a room with my 3-year-old twins. For a 15-year-old girl to choose to share a room with 3 boys tells me that something crazy is going on upstairs. About 9 months ago, I was getting ready for work. My husband and children had left to go to school. My daughter had taken the hairdryer to her room, so I was going upstairs to go and get it. I opened the door to the upstairs, and as I walked up the stairs, I smelt an odor like nothing I'd ever smelt before. It was almost metallic, but not quite. It was very pungent. I thought to myself that I need to tell my daughter to get rid of that particular brand of incense. When I walked into her room, standing by the wall was a tall thing. It was taller than her windows, dressed in what looked like a black cloak, and it turned around when I screamed. I could not move, and it just looked at me. It wasn't a malevolent look, it was more of a blank look. The scariest part was that it was a shiny red color, no hair. I ran, left the house, and went to work without drying my hair at all. The scary part of this was that since my daughter was 2 years old, she had talked about the red man who scared her. She would cry in her bed at night because she said he was looking in her window. I brushed it off then, and she stopped talking about him after her grandmother had passed away. But now, I believe her. When she was 8, my husband and I were getting divorced, and she started talking about him again. She wasn't just talking about him though. She said there were several spirits who lived in her room. She said her grandmother and father were there. They tried to protect us from the red man. There was a boy about her age who had a skateboard, and he was mean. She said, the red man followed me around and made all the bad things happen to me. And then, after that, he went away for a while. She talked about a time that she and I were driving on the interstate and a van ran us off the road. Our car almost flipped. She said when she looked at the van, the red man was driving, and her grandmother was in the back seat of our car with her, protecting us. Obviously, this scared me. She eventually stopped talking about him and hasn't mentioned him since. I didn't tell her what I saw in her bedroom that day, but she knew and asked me about it. Her room seems to be a hotbed of activity now. Her things get moved around, even while she is in the room, and it had been witnessed by her friends. She was gone for a week this summer and left her room clean. No one went upstairs while she was gone, and when she came back, her room was trashed. Clothes all over the floor, 2 posters were off the wall. My husband is home during the day, and he says he hears things moving around up there all day, footsteps going up and down the stairs. We had to get rid of our dog because he was constantly barking at the door. My children will go upstairs in the daylight, but not after dark. I will not set foot up there at all. My kitchen is the room I fear at night. I can feel someone there, but when I turn on the light, nothing is. I'm afraid to do much more than pray in the house because if my father really is there, I don't want him to leave me. I don't think it's the house, I think it's us, or at least my daughter. She has never been afraid up until recently, and I'm not sure what to do with it. She thinks she is crazy. She spent a week inpatient at a psychiatric hospital due to a psychotic episode and suicidal thoughts. She was hearing voices. She heard people calling her name constantly. I'm starting to think she wasn't psychotic, but hearing spirits who were trying to communicate with her. Even her psychiatrist doesn't think this is schizophrenia. She wasn't medicated before she started hearing it, and even now on medication she hears it. Since then, she has become very involved in our church youth group, and her moods have improved dramatically, but the voices remain. I don't know what I'm looking for. Maybe someone who knows what I am talking about as far as the red man goes. Could he be a demon? Could we get rid of him and leave whoever else is with us alone? We are Christians, and we believe that a demon cannot possess a heart that Jesus inhabits, so I don't believe that we are possessed. Maybe he's just waiting for us to waver. This is an honest-to-goodness true story, and I was hoping I could get some idea of what this thing was or is, so I can finally have some peace. I've never told anyone this, for fear of being called crazy. Please no wisecracks or jokes. I was 16. I'm 22 now. It was around 6:30 in the morning, and I was getting ready for school. I went downstairs to eat a breakfast sandwich, and I was sitting at the bar stool in the kitchen facing the living room, downstairs bathroom, and downstairs bedroom. I don't know what it was that came over me, but I had the sudden urge to look up. I saw this thing coming out of the bathroom. It was around 4.5 feet, but definitely not 4 feet tall. It was black. I couldn't make out if it was male or female, but I could see a neck, shoulders, arms, and legs. But the thing that scared me the most was the red eyes. They were like this haunting, fiery red from hell. All I know is that when I saw it, I could not move. This thing came out of the restroom and went into the downstairs bedroom. It either did not see me or did not care that I was there, or just plain old was not interested in me. However, the bedroom that it went into was my stepmom's mother's. She was a very mean woman. She had admitted to practicing black arts on people, and whatever that thing was, it went into the room with her. I don't know what the thing was, but I only saw it once, and I still feel its presence. I don't know if I'm really feeling a presence, or if I'm just scared because her mother has died. But why am I still feeling this thing hang around? Or is it her mother? Please, I need real serious answers on what this thing is or was. I need answers. On 2 separate occasions, I have recently seen things. The first thing I saw was on the street around the corner from my street. I was driving and stopped at a stop sign. I looked to the left, and right there, on the side of the road, was a shadow-like figure. It looked like a stick figure with a hooded t-shirt on. It was weird, kind of like a scarecrow, but it was black. I could not believe what I was seeing. My mind thought it was a kid at the bus stop because it was almost 8 a.m. I went through the intersection, but stopped and looked back at it to try and make out what I was seeing. It was still and not moving. Its arms were thin and as black as its shirt. It didn't have hands, no face, just a head that was black with the hood shape. I started to drive off, but then stopped again and tried to make out the legs, which looked like black sticks or somewhat holographic or something. That was about a month ago. Then, just a couple of days ago, when I went to the store at dusk and it had just gotten dark when I left the store, there was a stoplight in the middle of town. At the stoplight, the fire truck went east across the next block. I turned left, which is west. I go 2 blocks and turn right. I'm going back north, and at the first stop sign, across the road, right there, maybe about 10 feet from the corner, on the side of the road but in the road, were two people dressed in black cloaks. For some reason, my car lights weren't doing me any justice. It was like my lights were only shining at the bottom half of them. I tried to drive slow around them and get a good look, but they had pale faces that looked shaped like the "I know what you did last summer" mask, but a little different. I kept thinking maybe kids or teenagers are pranking me, or maybe it's something, but it's not Halloween. They weren't walking, just standing there, looking around, like they didn't know where they were or waiting. The reason that I mentioned the fire truck is because the fire station is just a block away down from where they were. I'd like to know what these things are and why I am seeing them. On Sunday, right after I put my 2.5-year-old down for bed, I walked downstairs and turned the volume up on the baby monitor, which is an app on my phone connected through our Wi-Fi. I heard a voice coming from the baby monitor app and heard my toddler responding back. Since I had just turned the volume up on my phone, I only heard the tail end of the other voice followed by my toddler's response. My toddler was saying something about turning off the lights, which is part of their bedtime routine, using a very specific phrase that I used to talk about turning off the lights, which makes it seem like the other voice was using that specific phrase to my toddler. The voice might have sounded like a female, maybe even like me, but I was so taken aback I couldn't say for sure. My husband and I were the only ones home, and we both heard the voice and just looked at each other, and I just got chills and felt a pit in my stomach. Only my husband and I have accounts for the monitor and have the two-factor authentication enabled, so we would get notified if someone was trying to log in. We are both logged into our phones. There was no other devices in our room besides a sound machine and the camera, so no Alexa, etc. that gives off a voice. I spoke to the baby monitor app tech support team, and they checked our camera details and confirmed that the only devices logged in were ours, and that the microphone was not used at all that day, so no one was talking to my toddler through that, so it doesn't seem like it was a hacking. Monday early evening, around 6 p.m., I was in my office, which shares a wall with my toddler's room. I heard 2 distinct knocks on the wall, which were so loud I jumped. Then 2 more knocks followed maybe 30 seconds later. 1 minute later, the same thing. 2 knocks, then 2 knocks. Our toddler also keeps saying a word that sounds like cocky. When we were in her room on Tuesday morning, I asked, "Where's Oki?" And my toddler goes over to the toddler-sized chair in their room and says that he's right there, he's waiting for me, he's standing on the chair. I know toddlers have quite the imaginations, but I was spooked to say the least. Other than that, I haven't heard or noticed anything unusual, but I am completely on edge now, especially considering my toddler was involved. I've saged the whole house once and saged just my toddler's room again. Does this seem like a ghost or something paranormal, or am I out of my mind here? I've been dreading nighttime because I'm terrified something else is going to happen, and I don't know what we are potentially dealing with here. I would appreciate any advice or thoughts on all of this. You will pay for what you did. I heard a deep voice in Portuguese in my dream and woke up around 4 a.m. I was begging for forgiveness the moment I woke up, but then became conscious and would wonder what really or who really did I talk to. I always forget what I have dreamt of, but I remember that that is the voice that always wakes me up, and I feel like it is a linked dream. They are always scary, always odd. Somehow there are lots of fights and arguments. "Oh, was the dream in color?" my friend asked me. I shook my head and answered, "Nah, I don't really remember." "Do you dream continuous dreams like a continuation of a video?" I asked my friend. She was very into dreams. "Was the whole dream in Portuguese?" my friend asked. Yes, maybe. I don't really remember. Are you going to read my dream? I got very little details, I said, in a way trying to stop my friend from talking about my dream. I feel that I can tell the meaning of a dream if you tell me more details. My friend fussed around, still trying to ask the details about my dream. Suddenly, I heard a voice from a distance. Jemias. What? I responded naturally. My friend stood there and looked at a direction. I looked at the same direction and saw a shadow pass away. Did the shadow speak? I asked my friend. No. That just came out of you, right? She replied. I did not understand what happened, so I ignored it and went about my day. I came back in the evening and asked what really happened at the moment when both of us saw the shadow. Well, that shadow, I thought I saw it come out from your back, she answered, as if she was not so sure about it. Do you know anything about that? I asked. Remember the trip we went last week to Noburitsu? She asked. Yes, we went to a place called, in English, Hell Valley. That place is not really what it sounded like or haunted. It's just a volcanic area full of hot springs and minerals, sulfuric gases, and boiling hot water. Not too far away, we saw a dead animal. Not sure what that was, but it was helplessly dangling off a cliff. Why did I bring up this trip here? That's because my friend believes that animals could curse people when they are in spiritual form, a very Japanese thought. Yes, I remember at Hell's Valley, we saw a dead animal hanging off a cliff. Does the shadow you saw look similar? I asked, in a way trying to be both understanding and kind of skeptic. I think it's a bear. You know, a bear in Ainu culture is. She tries to tell me as if she is sure of what really happened. You'll need to be a little more scientific, see. I'm not trying to say that you are wrong, but we were not bear hunting, and it is not logical if the bear is going to be haunting or cursing me, I said, not letting her finish her sentence. Raiju, I know, but the shadow was huge, and it is not a person. I saw it come out from your backside. It was shocking. If that was not a bear, she said in a tone as if she was very heated up and stopped in the middle of her sentence. What happened? I asked. She pointed back because there was a shadow right behind me. I smiled and said to her, It's Alishan playing under the lamp. We both laughed. From that day on, after the shadow went out, I did not dream of anything strange, and luckily nothing really bad had happened. I'm still kind of looking for the answer of what that shadow really is and what the dreams were really about. Do you consider this a spiritual experience? Does anyone have any thoughts on shadow people being living people from a different timeline? Possibly even yourself? Or am I crazy for thinking this? Here's my story of my shadow person throughout my life so far. I am interested to hear if anyone has any similar experiences or thoughts on shadow people. I've never thought much about a shadow person from my childhood, chalking it up to an overactive imagination or maybe just a trick of the life. At least, that is what I believed until the day it reappeared. As a child, the shadow figure would silently stand in the doorway of the spare bedroom, watching me as I lay in bed. I would stare back through my open bedroom door. It would only come at night, never moving or making a sound, just watching. But somehow, it never felt threatening. For years, I slept with my door open, and every night it would be there, a quiet presence. Eventually, I grew older and began closing my door, making sure it could no longer watch me. By the time I was a teenager, I had convinced myself that it was just a figment of my imagination. Yet even as I outgrew my childhood fears, I still found myself closing the door to the spare room every night, as though some lingering part of me remained cautious. I never saw the shadow person again during those years. Then, in my early 20s, I came back home from uni for Christmas. Staying in my old bedroom like I often did, I awoke one night to find both my bedroom door and the spare room doors wide open, and there it was again. It was standing in the same spot, watching me, just as it had all those years ago. I stared at it, waiting for my eyes to adjust, for it to dissolve into the shadows, but it didn't. It stood there, clearly defined arms, legs, a head, but no face. I was an adult now, too old to believe in ghosts, but how could I explain this figure that had haunted my childhood, now appearing once more, just as vivid as before? Too frightened to get closer, I eventually crept out of bed, shut my door, and stayed awake for the rest of the night. The next day, I investigated with my family, determined to find a rational explanation. We looked for anything that could cast a human-shaped shadow in the doorway, but the light source from the street had changed since I was a child, as all the streets in the UK were updated at that time. There was nothing that could explain the shadow appearing now, let alone during my childhood. We waited until nightfall to see if the shadow would reappear, and I could find a rational explanation, but it never did. Years later, I stayed at my family's home again, this time with my partner. We slept in the spare room, the very room that had always frightened me. At first, I felt uneasy, but with my partner at my side, I pushed the fear aside. But after he left early for work, I found myself alone in the house for a week. One night, while walking to the bathroom, I noticed the door to my childhood bedroom was open. I had left it that way after clearing out some old things. I paused, staring into the room, right where I'd spent so many of my nights in fear. Something strange watched over me, a shift in energy I couldn't quite explain. I stood there, frozen, as memories of my younger self staring back into the spare room flooded my mind. That's when it hit me. I was standing in the exact same spot where the shadow person used to stand, looking into the same place it once had. Could it be that I had been staring at myself all along? Was I the shadow person, looking back through time at my own childhood? The thought was chilling, yet oddly comforting. All those years of fear, and perhaps I had been haunting myself. I recently had an odd experience, and I'm trying to determine whether it was paranormal or just weird. For context, my husband travels for work, and he often gets home very late. A few nights ago, I was waiting for him to get home around 11 p.m. While waiting, I decided to roll my trash cans to the road before the trash day the next morning. My driveway is a semicircle that goes behind my house. As I rolled my first can to the road, my husband pulled up in the opposite side and drove to the back of the house. While he locked up his work truck, I rolled the other can to the road. When I got to the end of the road, I noticed a shape that looked like a dog watching me. I turned and began to walk towards my house. My driveway is probably 40 yards from my door to the street. As I walked, I kept looking back to figure out what that shape was. About halfway down my driveway, a car drove by and the light shone on the shape, which appeared to be a large brown and white dog. We live in a rural area, so it is not unusual to see strays or runaways. I kept checking behind my shoulder as I walked to make sure it was not following me. When I got closer to the house, I called my husband over and asked if he saw the dog as well or if I was just hallucinating, as it was still standing in the same spot. My husband responded that he saw it and advised me not to stick around to find out what it was. At this time, we see the creature turn and look directly at us before appearing to charge. We quickly sprinted inside and locked the doors. We were never able to see the creature again. I asked my husband if he saw it in the yard when he pulled up, and he said no. Our yard is large, but it is clear, so if the creature was close enough to get to the road that quickly, my husband would have had to seen it. Additionally, my dogs have been out there recently and did not act as if anything was there. Is there anything paranormal that would fit in an experience like this? It just is very odd and doesn't sit right with me. My husband and I are still both shaken. Like I said, we live in a very rural area and do not scare easily by creepy crawls in the dark. What are your thoughts? I've randomly been thinking about this experience a lot and realized there's a whole community I can ask about it. For a little bit of background, this was at my family home when I was a teenager in rural Indiana. I had already had other insanely weird ghostly experiences at this house and property, and I am all into the weird and unknown. Although this experience usually gets me panicked anytime I think about it. I was walking my puppy, Apollo, by the wood line at night. We had a big yard, so obviously he had no leash on. This tree line was next to huge woods as well. It was pitch black, and I usually am paranoid in the dark, but I felt insanely weird that night. It really felt like something was watching me, like the physical reaction your body gets to it, like being stalked. I soon realized maybe I was more paranoid and started walking down the gravel road back home. We lived in an area where people would be caught hiding in the woods from the cops. It was a really methed out area, and I wasn't taking any chances. Well, I took only a couple of steps back when I heard this giant thunk sound. It legitimately sounded like someone had dropped a bag of bricks from up high. The sound came from inside the woods, and it sounded like it was parallel to me. I had my dog with me, so I was going to yell, "He fucking bites!" assuming it could have been another guy on the run, but before I could say anything, this tall, I believe 7-foot figure comes out of the tree line. It had a sickly pale, white skin and was completely starved. I could see its bones poking out of the cloth it wore around its waist. It had a human-like body with human hands and feet, but lanky limbs and an abnormally wide chest. The face was genuinely the worst and most confusing part. Imagine a deer skull, but without antlers. It was kinda like that, but much wider and flatter on the front-facing part. No indentations or nostrils either. It was just flat and smooth. Although unlike a skull, it was covered in the same sickly pale skin. It had 2 sets of eyes, and it looked to have no mouth. It wore some wooden headgear I couldn't take time to comprehend. No ears, but had short, tangled, dark hair on the back of its head. The look I exchanged with this creature was short, but it still haunts me. The most insane part to me is that it looked terrified of me as well. It looked surprised and even froze in place as we just looked at each other. It didn't reach out to me, it just looked at me. Its eyes were pitch black like an animal's eye. Really, it was like a deer in headlights. My dog, being smart, immediately ran and waited for me at the front of our porch until I snapped out of it and ran too. I can't say I blame the little dude for leaving me either. At least he waited. I looked back while running and saw the figure fade back into the woods. Fast forward a week later and I started getting knocking and scratching at my bedroom window every single damn night. My window was up high to at least 8 feet from the ground. This went on for a week until I asked my friend who lived next to me to go outside and tell me what they saw. While I was on the phone with them, hearing the scratching against my window, they said they saw nothing. They thought I was the one scratching, and I fucking wish I was. This went on for months, and I had awful nightmares all while it happened. Eventually, they stopped and my dreams became less horrible. I wonder, was this a wendigo? I didn't think they would be afraid of humans, or look like that. Is it something entirely different? Please Reddit, I've been sitting on this for years. Tell me what you think. Back in 2020, I was living in rural South Dakota. During the pandemic, I started to go on night walks around the small town just to get out of the house. On these walks, I would put earbuds in and listen to music as I walked. I rarely came across anyone out at the same time other than a teenager who was sometimes out skateboarding. I was going on these walks 2 or 3 times per week for a couple of months without any issues. Then, one night, something happened that I still can't explain. There were few roads without any streetlights. However, I turned the corner onto a residential road with lights. As I walked along, I noticed the streetlight was out on the block ahead of me, but I didn't pay attention to it. As I walked along, I noticed what appeared to be a girl walking towards me. I thought it was odd given it was probably 11 or 12 p.m., but I'm a pretty big guy, so I try not to seem creepy or intimidating. I avoided eye contact and got off the sidewalk so she could pass without me being too close to her. All I noticed of the girl was that she seemed to be blonde and in a white nightgown or dress. As she passed me, I said hello, but I had earbuds in so I wasn't sure if she responded. The only odd thing I noticed as she passed was the strong scent of perfume. I assumed maybe she was coming back from a meetup or a date. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary to me until I went about 5 or 6 steps past her. Right at that time, the streetlights came back on suddenly. It startled me and made me freeze for a moment. I sort of instinctively turned around, but there was nobody there. I scanned the road and yards. I also took out my earbuds to listen. I saw and heard nothing. We were way too far from the next intersection for her to have quickly turned to another road, but we were too close to each other for her to go into any house quickly. It completely freaked me out, and I beelined it back to my place. I never went on another walk at night. I still have a hard time processing this, as I am a very skeptical person. I decided to go bass fishing at the Titan River one afternoon, hoping to catch something big. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows through the dense trees. The air was crisp, and the only sounds were the gentle rustling of leaves and the occasional splash of a fish jumping. As I made my way deeper into the woods, I found a secluded spot by the river. The water was calm, reflecting the orange and pink hues of the sky. I cast my line and waited, enjoying the peaceful solitude. But as the light faded, an eerie feeling began to settle over me. The woods grew darker, and the usual sounds of nature seemed to vanish. I heard a snap of a twig behind me. I turned quickly, but saw nothing. My heart started to race. I told myself it was just an animal, maybe a deer, but then I heard it again, closer this time. Then I heard a low, guttural growl that sent chills down my spine. I slowly backed away from the river, keeping my eyes on the darkening forest. Then a foul smell hit me like copper and death. It was overwhelming, and it made me gag. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was tall and gaunt, with eyes that glowed like embers in the dim light. Its skin was pale and stretched tight over its bones. It moved with an unnatural grace. I knew instantly what it was. A wendigo. Panic surged through me. I turned and ran, branches whipping at my face and arms. I could hear the wendigo behind me, its footsteps light but relentless. I stumbled and fell, my fishing gear scattering all around me. Desperation took over as I scrambled to my feet, but the wendigo was already upon me. It grabbed at me with long, skeletal fingers, its cold grip unyielding. I could feel its breath on my neck, hot and rancid. I struggled, but it was no use. Just when I thought it was the end, I remembered the flare gun on my side. I managed to grab it, and I fired. The bright light and heat made the wendigo recoil, giving me enough time to break free and run. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, and I jumped in and sped away, my heart pounding. I survived, but I'll never forget the glowing eyes and the smell of that copper and death. When I finally got home, I locked all the doors and windows, still shaking from the encounter. I tried to calm myself down, but every little noise made me jump. I couldn't sleep that night, the image of the wendigo haunting my thoughts. I knew I had to tell someone, but who would believe me? The woods, once my peaceful escaping for fishing, now felt like a place I could never return to. The next morning, I decided to do some research on wendigos. I found countless of stories and legends, each more terrifying than the last. I realized how lucky I was to have survived that encounter. Determined to not let fear control me, I vowed to return to the woods one day, better prepared and more cautious. But for now, I needed to recover from the trauma and find solace in the fact that I have lived to tell the tale. I also reached out to my native uncle to share what had happened. He listened intently and then shared some ancestral wisdom and rituals to protect myself from such entities. His guidance and reassurance provided a sense of peace and a plan for any future encounters. To start this story, it involves multiple encounters. The first one starts around the time I was 15 or 16. It was with me, my cousin we will call L, in the story. To start, it was at my mom's house, out in the middle of nowhere in Illinois. One night, during the beginning of winter, L was staying with me, and after a fun and tiring day around 12 p.m., we decided to go outside to walk around. We started out the door, and we sat on the porch for a minute to get our shoes on. Once we got our shoes on, we started walking down the driveway, and we made it about 10 steps down, before Elle and I looked towards my grandparents, where we both see a figure run underneath one of the street lights. At first, we both thought it to be my grandma's dog, as that is what it looked like, but once it got to the road, it stood up on 2 legs, and ran into the cornfield across the road. We both turned to each other and go, "Did you see that?" And I was the first to say, "Yeah, what the fuck was that?" I thought it was Grandma's dog, but then it stood up on 2 legs. He then said, that's what he thought. Then once we both realized it wasn't anything we knew, we both ran into the house at full blast, hitting the door at the same time. As we got in, we both started locking every single door and window there was. And once we did, we both hid in my room for the rest of the night with no trouble. The next encounter was a few years later with my older cousin that we will call D. It was during deer season when it happened. D and I were hunting together as we usually did every year. We were sitting there quietly talking about who knows what when a few deer came out and a couple of does. We were watching them all when suddenly a tall, skinny, rotten figure came out and jumped onto one of the small bucks, and it took it down in seconds, tearing it into pieces as we watched in horror as it picked it up and carried it off. As it was leaving, it made the most terrifying scream we had ever heard. Once it was out of sight, we looked at each other, and Dee was the first to say what I thought it was. That was a skinwalker, he said, and I nodded. We both knew about skinwalkers and didn't fully believe in them until today. The final encounter was with Dee and another cousin we will call Elle. This story started in the woods around where we all lived. We got together and set off to the woods to coon hunt, and we left around 9:30 p.m. and got to the woods around 9:40. Once we got there, we got out and got the 2 dogs we brought to let them loose. Once they were loose, we sat there talking and playing on our phones when all of a sudden, the dogs started going haywire. I brought my .22 and so did Dee. For those who don't know, .22s are the best weapon for shooting coons down and off a tree. Now that being said, I wish one of us had brought a bigger gun for protection. Once we were a bit into the woods, we started to hear moaning, like someone was getting attacked. We all looked at each other, and we knew by our facial expressions that there should be no one out here except for us. Once we realized we weren't alone, we all took off running towards the dogs in an attempt to figure out what was going on. Once we got closer to the dogs, we heard a long, high-pitched scream that stopped us in our tracks. We all looked at each other when Elle said, "What the hell was that?" It did not sound human. Dee and I looked at each other, and we whispered, "Skinwalker," as we both heard the same scream a few years back. Now, as these dogs are Dee's, he wanted to go off to save them, and me and Elle were not going to leave him alone, so we set off with our lights and our guns, and that is when we saw a tall, skinny, rag-pale creature swiping at the dogs. Dee and I took aim and started shooting. I shot more than him as I had an automatic, and he had a single shot. Now, I may have an automatic, but it only held 10 bullets, so I quickly ran out. As I ran out, the skinwalker turned towards us and said in broken sentences, "You all better run." Once those words were spoken, we all turned and ran through the woods at record speed, when all of a sudden, Dee tripped and I stopped to help pick him up. We turned around to see the creature running faster than we thought was possible, kind of in a weird glitchy way, like it was a video game player lagging around. We then turned and booked it back out of the woods, barely making it out, and somehow the dogs were right behind us. Once we all made it out, we turned and all saw the figure of a tall creature standing on the inside edge of the woods, looking at us as we stared back. It felt like we had been staring at it for a few minutes, but it was only a couple of seconds. That is when it turned and screamed, the same scream we had heard a while ago in the woods. We then loaded up the dogs into the truck and sped off, not saying a single word the whole ride back home, as we were all out of breath and our minds were left racing, trying to grasp how we all made it out. This story takes place in Idaho when I was about 6 years old. I'm in my 30s now, and I still talk to my parents about my encounter. My family of 4 lived in a new house on the outskirts of a cornfield. I had an adorable carousel-themed bedroom with mint-colored walls and elegant horse wallpaper. I'm not talking about the creepy, old-time carousel horses you see at the fair where the horses look like they are screaming in fear. If you had seen my room, you would have thought it was adorable and happy. Like your typical 6-year-old, I was afraid of the dark and had a nightlight near my closet in the corner of my room. My dad snores very loudly and would keep my mom up at night, and during the week, they would sleep in separate rooms so they could both get enough rest for work. My dad teases my mom that she is such a light sleeper and that she can hear cells divide. Nothing seemed odd that night. My mom read to my brother and me, my parents gave us hugs and kisses, my dad went to his room, and my mom stayed in the master bedroom. She always kept her door open in case my brother and I needed her during the night, and we all fell asleep. I woke up in the middle of the night. I didn't have a clock in my room, but the house was silent and dark. My trusty nightlight comforted me with its cheery light, and as I turned over to look at it, standing next to my nightlight, In front of the closet were 3 figures. I froze. They were of different heights, but all very thin. It is hard to describe the exact color since it was dark, but I believe they were a mottled light gray. They had long arms and fingers that reached to their knees. Their stomachs were concaved, and their rib cages were very slender. Their eyes is what, to this day, still disturbs me. Their eyes were massive, shiny and black, just watching me. They had no nose that I could see, and a small mouth. They did not once make a noise. I don't know how long I stayed frozen in bed, too afraid to move, but I finally crawled out of bed. I slowly walked to my door, never taking my eyes off of them, and went to my mom's room across the hall. The entire time I walked to my mom's room, they watched, turning their heads slowly, watching me with their wet, black eyes. When I got to my mom, I woke her up and said, "Mom, there are aliens in my room. Can I sleep with you?" She sleepily said, "Of course." I don't think she had realized what I had said, or she chalked it up as a bad dream because she didn't ask any questions and fell right back asleep. I got into bed with her and waited. I was snuggling up with my mom, my face buried in the covers. I felt safer knowing she was there. When I got the courage, I peeked around the room. There, standing next to my dad's dressers, were the aliens. They had followed me and were now watching us. I gasped and threw the blanket over my head. I don't know why children think a blanket thrown over their heads will save them, but eventually I fell asleep. Nothing to my knowledge happened for the rest of the night. In the morning, everything seemed normal. There were no signs that we had those things in our house. I told my parents what I saw, and I felt like they believed me. I don't know why I didn't wake my mom to show her. Maybe it was for the best. Who knows what they would have done if my mom saw them. I have always had paranormal things happen around me, but since starting my university, it has gotten worse. For anonymity's sake, I won't go into too much detail about the history of the university, but I will bring up some key information as my encounter happened on school grounds. In New Zealand, this university is an infamous paranormal hotspot as it used to be a mental hospital, one of the longest running in the country's history. The site was used as a medical security prison after the hospital closed and has been a university for around 30 years. Some of the old buildings remain, but are no longer used for teaching and are currently being demolished as both the prison and the hospital were known for treating patients with cruelty. I'm just saying this information so you have an idea of the negative energy attached to this place and how it is a paranormal hotspot and may seem intriguing to cryptids. It was the early hours of the morning and only a few beams of light were on the horizon from the morning sun. I wanted to relax, so I walked across campus to a creek hidden among some native bush. The creek was close to the motorway and some busy streets, but the cars just caused a quiet hum. It was peaceful just sitting there on the grass bank and listening to the dawn choir of birds. I was watching the algae float on the creek and searching for fish in the water. I suddenly felt like someone was watching me. Goosebumps prickled on my skin and I felt freezing cold even though it was a very warm autumn. I was nervous to take my eyes off the water, as I didn't know if it was just my brain playing a trick on me or if it was something real. I closed my eyes and took in a deep breath when I heard it. Footsteps. At that point, I was grateful I had placed my pocket knife in my pocket before going to the creek for safety. Not that it could help if anything seriously went wrong, just might scare someone enough for me to get to safety. I heard a splash in the creek opposite me, causing me to subconsciously open my eyes. There, in front of me, stood a friend. His face was wrong and smile was uncanny. He was also supposed to be on the other side of the country and definitely didn't have enough money to travel to surprise me, and if so, wouldn't have been able to keep it to himself. The thing in front of me was not my friend. I stood up quickly and began to slowly step backwards, keeping my eyes trained on this thing. It began to move its mouth like it was talking to me, but no words came out. Its mouth was pitch black though, and seemed to absorb all the light the rising sun was giving off. "Go away," I remember saying to it in a shaky voice, yet as stern as I could muster, which just made the creature's smile grow as it began to laugh. The laugh was high-pitched, yet deep and guttural. It seemed to be echoing in my head and not traveling through my ears. I began to shake my head, whispering, "No, no, no." as the laughs continued. It took a step forward, further into the creek, and closer to me. Instinctively, I took a few steps back and hit a tree behind me. The laughter grew and it began to take more steps, and I stood there, too afraid to move. The creature stopped only a few meters away and twisted its head down so the back of it was against its chest, and its eyes still pointed at me. Its fingers began to grow longer, and finally, the laughter stopped. Thankfully, I heard chatter as two people walked down the path to the creek. I turned my head to look at them, and they gave me a confused look. I looked back at the creek, and the creature was gone. In its place was an eel at the water's edge. I stepped closer to it to grab my bag, and it opened its mouth to the same black void that I saw in the creature pretending to be my friend. This happened earlier this year, and since then, I haven't been able to find any true explanation for it. The creature resembled nothing known in New Zealand's myths and folklore, and I haven't been able to find anyone with a similar experience online who are in the same country. The only explanation I have is that it was a skinwalker, but not a traditional Navajo skinwalker by any means. For starters, they aren't supposed to be able to morph into humans or be on a whole different continent. I can't help but form a theory though. Have skinwalkers, like most animals, adapted to live besides humanity? With an all-time high in trade between countries, have they found a way to travel the seas? Has the traditional skinwalker from myths gone extinct, and in place a new species with more power now reigns over the world of cryptids? I was originally born and raised in Mexico, in between two cities more than 2 hours away in both directions. Keep in mind there was no power or electricity where we lived, in the Cerro, which means mountain ground. We tied up horses by the road and waited for the ride. With that being said, things started happening to my grandfather's animals. One morning, he woke up and he was angry. I didn't know why until I saw one of the horses that had 3 big gashes on its back. Before this happened, we had 3 dogs, 1 female and 2 males. 2 were crossbreeds between German Shepherds and something else. Well, 2 weeks before the horse incident, one of the male dogs was killed and its head was chewed up really bad. The other 2 seemed to live in fear after that. One night, my grandpa heard the horse that was attacked making noises like it had seen something. He went outside, and that is when he saw the creature. It was skinny and big, half the size of a horse, with no skin, a long snout like a dog, and pointy ears. It had big and long legs and long and lanky arms. He took 3 shots at it with a 22mm gun, and it ran into the Cerro. I think he hit him the first time and missed the other 2 when it ran. I couldn't sleep all night or the next night when I heard what sounded like a scream. He didn't sleep for 2 weeks straight, and only in the daytime, until he went to a relative's house and borrowed a hunting rifle. Time passed, and he heard from a neighbor that you can say lived 3 miles away that one night he was looking for his lost sheep and he encountered something with the same features. Our neighbors said the creature chased him, but since he was on his horse, it did not catch up. They to this day sleep with a loaded gun at night, and the animals keep turning out missing and some dogs dead. Still no one has yet to report killing whatever that creature is. This is a story my friend told me, so I don't have perfect details. For some background knowledge, he is now 15, and back when this happened, he was only 10. The incident took place in Missouri. He said that this is by far the creepiest thing he had ever seen in his whole life, and was sure of it. Let's begin. It was a while ago, back in 2017, when he was hunting with his grandfather. They were out in the woods around 9 p.m. He had his BB gun with him, in case they spotted a deer. He walked around for a good amount of time, and then smelled this horrid scent. Something was horribly stinky. He described it as if a skunk spray, but multiple times worse. He wondered what it was, and he followed the scent, but he couldn't find the source of it. This deeply concerned him, wondering what it came from. Then the scent got stronger and stronger, until it was impossibly bad. That is when the scent simply vanished. He then noticed, with his grandfather, everything went completely silent. There wasn't a single sound to be heard. That is when it hit him. He knew that complete silence in the wilderness means there is a big predator nearby. Him and his grandfather wandered around when out of the corner of his eye, he saw something big shift quickly. He told his grandfather, but he didn't believe him and thought he was hallucinating. But my friend knew it was not a hallucination. From then on, they kept walking around trying to find a deer when they both saw something huge pass by fast. That is when he turned to his grandfather and saw a look of true terror on his face, because his grandfather knew what that was, but he didn't want to scare him, so he said it was just an overgrown deer. They kept walking and were close to the very middle of the woods when they heard this horrible screech. He described it to be like an elk and a woman's scream combined to create this sound. He then sworn to have seen this very big and pale creature with antlers on its head, with little patches of fur, but it was mainly just skin. That was all he could make out before it ran quicker than anything he had seen in his whole life. From that point forward, he was running home, but his grandfather couldn't easily catch up. They both escaped in the end, but they knew what they had encountered. He also said he could have sworn that it stared at him as he stared at it. He said it had reddish-orange eyes that glowed in the moonlight. He said he thought it was a wendigo, and so did his grandfather. They both now know not to venture into the woods that late at night. My friend also said he had seen it once more in a bush in front of his house, and it made this weird look at him, and ran right off into the trees before looking back at my friend, and then continuing off into the woods. Thank you for reading this story, and I hope you enjoy this horror story as much as it freaked me out. My family has always been big on Halloween. Our homes are decorated, we walk the streets when we were kids, and host costume parties now that we're older. I've got lots of good memories of the night when my 2 older brothers, mother, and friends, but there's one particular story that we still frequently relate on Halloween via family group message nowadays that was not as pleasant as others. A downright chilling experience that has forever embedded itself into our collective reflections. October 31st, 1991. I had turned 2 in June and was already in my own bedroom, which was the designated nursery beforehand. We lived in a suburb of Houston, Texas, that is today a curved row of houses, but back then it was a densely forested area. There was a large window in my room that looked across the backyard and into the woods beyond. On this particular Halloween, the moon was a waning crest shape and projected just enough light to see by. I had a big plastic cutout jack-o'-lantern hanging by a thumbtack on my wall. Thin traces of splintered moonlight draped onto its big grinning face. An eerie setting indeed for what is still my favorite night of the year. My mom, brothers, and I were all worn out after a lengthy candy excursion that went well after our usual bedtime. My 2 siblings had their own rooms, and my parents were watching Night of the Living Dead in the living room. I laid back beneath the covers, taking in the sound of the swirling ceiling fan overhead, my drifting eyes looking towards my window. That's when I heard it, a faint scratching, like the pawing of a kitten on a glass door. Only we didn't have a kitten, and there certainly wasn't a glass door in my room. I stirred back to wake, wondering what that sound was. I listened carefully to the gentleness of the silence, the swirling of the ceiling fan, Barbara's screams from the living room television, a symphony of horns bursting to life as she got chased to her car by a horde of undead. Then it came again, a scratching sound, like fingernails at the base of my window now. I looked towards the window, but nothing was there. Slithers of Halloween moonlight passing through the treetops and rushing into my bedroom. It came again, from something wholly unseen. Was it a ghost? A murderer? This thing my brother told me about called the boogeyman? Some other creature from deep in the recesses of the forest? Scratching, scratching, trying to break in, trying to eat me, to murder me, or zap me to planets unknown. Scratch, scratch, scratch. The invisible fingers of something that could only be lurking on the other side of my window. Finally, I couldn't restrain myself any longer. I screamed, screaming like a 2.5-year-old had never screamed before. My mom came charging into my room, bursting the door open like a firefighter. I cried out to her that there was something in my window and that it was trying to get in. She heard the scratching sound too. Alarmed, she turned on the lights and raced to the window. Nothing. No ghost. No murderer. No boogeyman. Not even a lizard or moth. Not even a tree limb. But still, it scratched and it scratched. My mom called for my dad, and by this time, my brothers were rushing into my room too, with their pop guns in their hands. My dad stepped inside, hearing the scratching sound as well. He went to the window besides my mom, but turned about when he saw nothing outside. Yet, it came again. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Finally, we saw what it was. Scraping the wall just above my bed and just above my head, the plastic cutout of the grinning jack-o'-lantern. It moved in the wind of my ceiling fan, the thumbtack having loosening its grip somehow. My dad took it down and the scratching suddenly ceased. What a fright it was on that Halloween night. My brothers still enjoy poking fun at me about it, although none of us are below the age of 30 anymore. Back when I was still earning my undergraduate's degree, I experienced something so paranormal that it changed everything I thought was possible. My roommate at the time was also my childhood best friend, and I knew well enough that he undoubtedly did not believe in ghosts. That was something crazy people talked about to him. He was an avid outdoorsman, socially outgoing in Greek life, and he was a good student with a strong work ethic. Simply put, he did not have the time to dwell on fantasies. So, to have his validation towards the end of our hunting was surreal. He knew me long enough that he remembered my brother passing in high school, so he knew that I was very spiritual as a result. It began shortly after he and I hurriedly moved into our new apartment after our previous roommate's situation expired. This place was older and definitely gave me a weird vibe. We were so young and broke, so I didn't think either of us cared. It was a duplex with 2 units, a downstairs 2-bedroom apartment, and an upstairs 2-bedroom apartment. We had a couple that lived downstairs for the first couple of months we lived there, and so we were getting used to hearing them walk around or play music. Occasionally, he played the drums, but generally they were pretty quiet and respectful. About a week after they moved, I began to hear louder footsteps than usual and doors slamming. I thought it was someone the landlord hired to repair something, but there was no cars or trucks in the driveway. Initially, I just brushed it off, but a month had gone by and I was still hearing it. I asked my roommate if he'd heard anything, but he just shrugged his shoulders and said, it's probably just some workers, and then went on studying. I felt as if I was going crazy. The downstairs unit stayed vacant for a few months, and somewhere in the second of the month, I got a phone call late at night from him. I was staying at my girlfriend's house when he asked in a panicky voice, "Bro, did you just run up our staircase?" There was only one entrance to our apartment, and his room was to the right, next to the stairs. He said he had heard the door open and slam, and then someone sprinting up and down the stairs. He reports that the door did not slam a second time. He was so spooked that he had taken to the stairwell with his firearm drawn. He walked down the perimeter of the house to reveal nothing. Over the next month, he had been hearing sounds the same as me, but had been staying gone more than usual. It just so turns out that my girlfriend began staying more at my place around that time, and she was the first to notice that my mood was changing. Every time I was home, I just felt a dark energy. Apparently, I was also waking up multiple times in the night and going away for long periods of time. She eventually decided to drop in and see where I'd gone, but she found me standing upright with my eyes closed. She was so panicked, yet she did not wake me. The next morning, I awoke with 3 big scratch marks all the way down my back. She told me that it was a sign of a demon, but I did not know if I believed that. Our new neighbors moved in downstairs, and it's like it all stopped for a while. They were considerably louder and loved to party, so the demon situation sounded a lot better. I would later on continue to hear sounds, but we would walk into rooms and all the lights were on, or all of the drawers and cabinets were open. But nothing was ever stolen, and neither of us ever recalled doing that. Both of these things began to happen weekly. He had one more stairwell experience before he moved out, but it was the weirdest thing that happened after I finally moved out. Needless to say, my neighbors and I were not friends, so to receive a phone call from them meant something significant. I'd been moved out for about a week and I got a phone call saying, "Would you shut the fuck up? I don't know what you're doing up there yelling and slamming doors, but it's 3 a.m. Shut up." I told her to go upstairs and open the door, and she would see that there was nobody there since I moved out a week ago. She went upstairs and all the lights were on, and not a soul inside. I was terrified for months, and after I moved out, a shadowy figure would follow me to my new place. I would see its dark silhouette in the window one night, staring straight into my soul, waiting to leech energy off of me again. This was all so creepy. For context, my boyfriend and I fall asleep every night on FaceTime with the camera on and with our phones facing us. This morning, he told me everything he saw. He said that he randomly woke up for no reason and looked over at his phone because he thought he saw movement in the corner of his vision. He repeated the words "babe" a few times, thinking I was awake and couldn't sleep. What he saw was a shadow figure brushing their hair with their hands while also looking dead at my phone. He didn't see a face since it didn't have eyes. He told me that the figure was playing with my hair as well. At one point, he woke me up saying "babe" again. This time I woke up and responded with a "what?" grumpy because I was just awoken. Only then did the figure fade away. P.S. Lately I've been feeling things. My room felt hotter or colder more than usual. I've been feeling more nauseated, and I've been feeling more dizzy. This has been happening for days. My boyfriend also told me that he's been seeing other things at night as well as around me, like shadowy figure or people-like figures. What is happening? To preface, I work as a lab tech in a water treatment plant. It's a modest place with facilities that are a bit run down, but still in high functionality. We're placed on a back road near a state park, our source of water being the large lake nearby. For the most part, it's calm back here. We regularly have uniform and chemical deliveries, so there's a semi-frequent buzz of human traffic. Plus, with the state park being so close, we see a lot of bicyclers, trail runners, and horse riders just beyond the fence line. While there is only a singular tree on the actual property, our facility is close to the woods and boasts a fun collective of local wildlife. The more interesting aspect of our location, though, is the Pioneer Cemetery out front. It's a small thing, totaling less than 100 visible graves. Most of the stones have been worn down by weather and lichen, but on the visible dates placed, most of them in the late 1700s and early 1800s. There's a local effort to document and preserve what we can, but the effects of time are working against what is left. It makes me feel a bit sad if I'm honest. These were some of the oldest settlers in the local area. It is a shame that their physical plots and gravestones etched may just be lost to time. I can't help but wonder if that sort of thing is what drives any lingering spirits out of the place. Maybe they're upset about being forgotten too. I say this because despite the calmness and relative peace of the water plant, sometimes weird and inexplainable things happen. I mentioned previously that we have regular people traffic, but that is only true part of the time. I think the most people I've seen gathered on the site at once was when we hosted a seminar. Otherwise, when we're fully staffed, there's usually about 3 of us on the premises at the same time. On weekends, when the operators work 12-hour shifts though, it is usually just the 2 of us. I bring it up because I know that this is one of the ways I've come to know that this activity is not some kind of ongoing prank from my coworkers. I've always believed in the paranormal and supernatural. I've seen and heard ghosts since I was a child and had some experiences in nature that I cannot explain. Even so, it is always a bit of a shock when I see or hear things firsthand. I just had an anticipated experience activity at my place of work, you know. Just this year, there has been an increasing amount of activity that I don't wish to leave undocumented any longer. Being a water plant, there's a surplus of residual noise, pumps working, water draining and dripping, alarms going off, and footsteps of operators going about their usual routines. I've grown used to these noises, and I am able to recognize when my mind is matrixing the distant draught of water into quiet voices. Sometimes the sounds I hear are far different, knocking on the walls or on the other side of a glass door that I can plainly see through, humming and singing of old church hymns when walking through the pipe or filter galleries, full-on conversations in the stairwells between 2 voices that I do not recognize. I only work with 10 people, so I know their voices. These are different and unfamiliar. Every once in a while, I'll see movement in my peripherals, something just fast enough for me to notice and then miss if I turn my head. There's never anything distinguishable about the figures. I'm only left with the lingering feeling that someone or something was there as proof that I saw anything at all. The only thing I noticed as being different from all the other activity was the intense feeling of being watched in the basement level. It didn't happen every time I went down there. It was more of a 50-50 chance that I'd feel anything down there. But of those times that I did, it was a heavy sensation, like I was being visually dissected while I was there. So while there has been minor activity, it has generally been nothing more than what I could classify as background noise. Something you might not even notice if you're not paying attention, or something you wouldn't pick up if you're not in tune with your instincts. That was until a couple of weeks ago when I had a day that changed the entire status quo of this established ghostly activity. It had been one of those two-man crew days, only myself in the lab and one of the operators there to oversee everything else. Things were quiet as the both of us were tired and opting to go out about our day rather than strike up a conversation. I had to go and fetch a couple of samples in the basement from a location we called the CFE, which stands for Combined Filter Effluent. I mentioned my plans as a quick check-in to my coworker, a safety protocol since cellular service is non-existent down there, and then began traversing the plant to get to the basement. The pipe gallery, which houses the CFE, is only accessible via 2 stairwells at either end of the building, both of which are a solid 2 or 3 step flights. The length of this chamber is about a half a football field and is not a quick crossing to make. It sits beneath the filter gallery and has a vaulted ceiling that is about 2 stories tall, which means the acoustics in there is always strange and has me on edge, especially when the constant dripping of water sounds more like unknown voices coming from the other end of the area. My usual approach to the CFE means I come in on one end gallery and exit on the other. This is partially due to the location of the sample site versus the lab. It makes more sense to take this path, but it is also due to my paranoia that I'm going to see someone else down there. The way I do it, I get to do a visual sweep of the whole room before I go about grabbing my sample, thus turning my back on the rest of the gallery. I went about my usual routine, humming a song as I strode down the stairs and doing visual checks for anything on that I might need to bring up to the operator. It had felt like a normal trip down, no unseen watching eyes, nor thick feeling in the air. I plopped one of my samples beneath the CFE tap and dragged out my phone to take a picture of the turbidity displayed on one of the machines nearby. All was normal, and then a hand clamped over my left shoulder, the fingers cold to the touch. A deep voice that I did not recognize said, "CFE, huh?" Whoever it had been, close enough that I could feel the breath on my neck as they said it. I was frozen for a moment before I whipped around, but there was no one there. A shiver ran down my spine as I frantically scanned the chamber for any signs that my coworker had followed me down. I ran over to the nearest stairwell and looked up to see if he was trying to skitter away, but I knew he couldn't be. There had been no sounds of footsteps leading up to the encounter, no shuffle of fabric, no tap of shoes on the cement floor or metal grates. Nothing. While it hadn't been scary, it was startling to have this physical incident with no person nearby. It took me a minute to process that I hadn't known the voice to the words and that none of my coworkers had. There had been a country twang to the voice that none of my coworkers had. I crouched down and calmed down my breathing, intent on finishing my sampling before I left the area, though a part of me just wanted to bolt back upstairs and to my coworker, away from whatever had just interacted with me. I snatched up my bottle as soon as it was filled and opted to head it back to the far stairwell. I knew there was no way someone could have gotten away so quickly in such a large room, but my paranoid brain demanded I checked anyway. As I turned to head up the stairs, I heard it. Footsteps. For a second, I was relieved. Perhaps it was my coworker after all, and he decided to reveal himself after my scare. Then I actually looked down the length of the gallery where the footsteps were approaching from, and I saw nothing. Then that same deep voice called out, "Come back!" My heart picked up from my chest as I pushed myself up those stairs 2 at a time. I had no idea what this invisible entity wanted, and I wasn't sticking around to find out. I ran down the hallway of the next level and straight into the stairwell that would take me back to the top level of the plant, only thinking to get away from the basement as quickly as possible. As I burst into the hallway that led to the lab, I stopped when I realized there was a conversation happening in the control room. I stuttered to a halt and stared into the area. The control room was closed off by 2 large windows and 2 doors that were half windows as well. I could clearly see that there was no one in there. My mind was still whirring from the incident in the basement, and this was not helping the panic die down. I pushed the door open and the sound silenced. As a desperate effort to find something that might offer an explanation, I woke up all the computers and searched for an open internet browser. I thought that maybe something on there was playing sound, but there was nothing. I left the room just as quickly and darted back into the lab. My coworker Jay was still in there running tests just as I had left him. He noticed my frantic breathing and looked up with a worried expression. "You okay, eh?" he asked. I didn't even know what to say. I put my hands on the lab countertops as a way to ground myself, and I tried to control my breath. "You've been in here since I went down, right?" I questioned once I had calmed down somewhat. "Yes, I was doing the 10 a.m. test like I told you," he answered. I laughed, a bit incredulous. Jay is a large man with notoriously harsh asthma, which is to say, he and the stairs are not friends. As I looked at him, I registered the fact that his breathing pattern was normal and unhindered. There was no way it had been him, which left the question of who it had been. I'm still not sure what to decide about it. If I think about the incident in hindsight, there wasn't really anything scary or malevolent about the voice, nor the energy involved. It had almost been like interacting with one of my coworkers as we went about our days. But since I startle as easily as I do, it had freaked me out. I kept the incident to myself until I found a time to corner the only other woman on staff, my work mom, M, and told her about it. To my surprise, she was quick to tell me that she had experienced something similar in almost the exact same spot about 6 months ago. M also informed me that she had been seeing these spirits for years. She's the 3rd shift supervisor, often working solo as she's one of 2 operators on that schedule, so most of her nights she's the only one on site. M told me that over the years she has worked here, she's been seeing wispy forms moving throughout and from the Pioneer Cemetery up front. They walk right through the chain link fencing that surrounds the facility and disappear like mist under the sun. M also proceeded to collaborate a lot of other notes of activity, from the sounds I'd been hearing all the way to the feeling of being watched in the basement. I'm still blown away by this revelation. I thought it had just been me experiencing these things, as all of the guys dismissed my claims as my mind's playing tricks on me, but I now have confirmation that this ongoing activity is not something new. I've only been on this job for about 2 years. My work mom has been here for about 30. I can't even imagine how much she has experienced in that time, and I am kind of curious to learn more even though my heart rate still skyrockets as I go down those stairs. To M and I, these spirits are very real and active, and now that I know they originate in the cemetery, their graves silent and dark while their restless presence manifests within the water plane's walls. The incident is still as fresh in my mind as the day it happened. I struggle to convince myself to go down into the pipe gallery basement. As open-minded as I am to the supernatural, I don't necessarily want to experience it firsthand. I could go without it, actually. So I guess this entry can serve as my attempt to find peace of mind after such a startling encounter. Spirits of the cemetery, I will listen for your voices, but I do not need physical contact to know that you are there. Please let me keep it this way.